Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
Hot.
Yeah, I went riding through Gastonia a while ago. It was 104 degrees, and that beautiful city town of Gastonia, the Fayetteville of the Piedmont.
Got it.
Fayetteville's the hottest place on earth. Fort Bragg, oh my God. If that's what it felt like in Gastonia today.
My sister went to school in Fayetteville at Methodist, and oh my gosh.
I carried a rucksack when I was there last. Won't do that again anytime soon. Let me get me something to drink. Just all this talk of heat's made me thirsty.
Okay.
Y'all need y'all some sweet tea.
That and about a full night's worth of sleep. Yeah.
When you planning on getting that?
July.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds about right. I might sleep in on Friday a little bit.
All right. Yeah. So we got to Fort Bragg on a Sunday afternoon. Sunday's your day off in the Army. And we got to Fort Bragg on Sunday afternoon to start summer camp, which is basic for ROTC folks. They don't call it basic training, they call it summer camp, which is okay. So we got there and it was, I don't know, about 110 and just absolutely miserable. And there was a fellow out on the playground on his day off. He had his rucksack, the big one, not the little one. He had the big one that carries 80 pounds out, that thing full, out jogging around the playground on his day off. And I thought, oh, this ain't going to be good. This will not be a fun and laugh-filled adventure. And so, but that's what it feels like outside today. It feels like Fort Bragg and Fayetteville today. That's not good. Let's see, it's cooled off to 99 here. Not bad. All right. Is everybody here? Let's see how many we got. We got 4, 8, 12. So we're missing 2. We need 2 more to show up. Well, let's go ahead and get started anyway. Thank you for being on time. Welcome to MELS 603 for the Gaston cohort. This is our 6th time already. Time flies when you're having fun. So it's case study 2 night. I have the list of who went first last time. Got a couple of housekeeping items before we get into our case study tonight. The first one is I want to do a follow-up on last week in terms of, and it was our weekly activity this week, so I'll share my screen. Our weekly activity was cyberbullying, citing policy. And so I want to make sure that I cover, I know I mentioned it last week, but I want to cover cyberbullying law. This is getting to be kind of the problem du jour in schools now. This is make sure you have covered well what cyberbullying is and understand that the law on bullying, which is the School Violence and Prevention Act of 2009, says that if whatever happens, whether it happens at school or what device is immaterial, if it creates a hostile environment at your school, you have to deal with it. And since you don't have subpoena powers, that's why I say involve law enforcement. It may be bigger and uglier, but you do not want to be the school that's accused of ignoring it, and then somebody gets hurt. Somebody gets hurt at your school or out in the community, or God forbid, some kid commits suicide because they've been bullied. It all comes back to your doorstep. So understand what cyberbullying is. The law was not repealed, only the Twitter war deal. Make sure you understand what cyberbullying is, and that it didn't have to happen at your campus or some campus-related device for you to have to deal with. The best thing is go to the police and say, I have a report that this happened. And if they don't want to pursue it, that's on them. But you've got to protect yourself on these, because sometimes, even though you're in the right, the court of public opinion pretty much ends your career. As we say in the business, there must be blood. Somebody has to be sacrificed. Somebody has to, we've got to show that we're doing something before we can move on. And so make sure you understand that you've got to do that. I think that was pretty much it. We'll talk about the other case study next week. We have one more week of class, and then you have the week off for the 4th. We'll talk about the case study. All your OMAs have been very good. I'm very pleased with those. You've done an excellent job with them. So I think we're ready. Anybody have anything for the good of the group? Oh, one more thing I wonder about. One of my folks in last night's class, who is the same place as y'all, but she's already an AP in Henderson County. And one of the things that she wrote in her reflection from our first case study on Bobby is that we should all be working toward making sure that a student's grade reflects their learning and not their behavior. I thought that was an excellent summation of that whole case. Full disclosure, Maggie's been an instructional facilitator forever, and she's taken a kind of a different path late in her career, but she's a smart cookie. She made an excellent point there. So just as a follow up on that. All right, so I see that Monica, Emily, Wanda, and Megan are first up tonight because they had to wait for last time. So click on your share and start us out tonight. We're at case study 2. The superintendent is proposing a student-based budget. So let's hear what you think about it.
All right. So Wanda, Emily, Monica, and Megan were our group. And we started off with just the case study summary. Pretty much the superintendent wrote a letter to parents about a program that is called student-based budgeting that provides money to students based on enrollment and specific needs of the child. And the superintendent has taken the initiative to pilot the system after he's discussed with 4 other schools and their concerns and has decided, well, let's give it a try. So he sent a letter home to parents about that. And then we, just to outline the Leandro case, because this aligns with the Leandro case, in 1994, a lawsuit was filed by parents, students, in 5 school districts. And they argued that the wealth of the child should not determine the quality or equitability of the child's education. So in 3 years' time, the NC Supreme Court ruled that every child should have a fundamental state constitutional right to a sound and basic education. But in 2002, the Superior Court says, well, the state's not meeting their obligation of a sound basic education, and that they should be requiring these 4 things: a high quality teacher in every classroom, a well-prepared principal in every school, adequate resources, and provide pre-K for all at child risk. But the problem is The 2002 ruling cannot require pre-K because the law doesn't require students younger than 7 to attend school, and it defers it. So they defer that to state executives and legislative branches. So we're going to skip, quite a few years to 2017. And Governor Cooper actually created a commission to carry out a plan of action where he's going to recommend that an independent consultant comes in and hired to research the cause of educational disparities. Well, in 2018, that judge appointed West Ed, which is the independent consultant, to analyze and recommend ways for the state of North Carolina to comply with the Leandro ruling. 2019, they do a year of research. They released their findings of more than 300 pages and hundreds of smaller reports, and they outlined 8 critical needs. And it pretty much aligns with the 2002 findings that, you should have a high quality teacher in every classroom, adequate resources, and so on. In 2020, the Judge Lee signs a consent order stating that all parties agree to the facts of the case and develop a plan within 60 days. So they have 60 days to create this plan. And then in 2021, plaintiffs and the state submit a 57-page report of how they're going to implement recommendations. So here we are today in 2022. This was in March. The North Carolina Supreme Court agreed to hear the arguments in the Leandro case after it was returned to the Superior Court because there was some kind of late budget that passed in 2021. So we have to remember this is an ongoing case. It's almost been 30 years since it started, and it talks about the equitability of a child's education.
So for the next slide, I just used the table that was found in our resource management for school administrators, the table on school site-based budgeting. I tried to scan it at work and it wouldn't scan. So I know this is not too clear. So on the next slide, I'll be able to go over everything. So the the school site-based budgeting, legal implications to consider or what the funds can be used for. Categorical funds, Title I, federal and state, can only be used for instructional materials. It can be used for teachers to provide supplemental instruction, for parent involvement. And I thought this was a good one for the school site-based budgeting, because if you have strong families, you'll have strong students. Hourly time can be used for professional development to further assist targeted student populations. And then for the school site discretionary funds, they can be used for other employees at the school, teachers for building level programs, minimizing class sizes, so the student teacher ratios will be lower, supplies and materials, money for additional hours of supervision, and for special programs. And then just in my notes, I put that Leandro states, it is the state of North Carolina's right to provide basic sound education to students, not the district. It went on to say that students have the fundamental right to the opportunity to receive this. However, with the burden of this fact being on the state, the superintendent may be limited as to how or if this can be an option for the schools. Also, if the school is already providing the 4 components, the definition of the basic sound education, there may be issues with the school site-based budgeting becoming a reality. And then lastly, a critical point to consider is that action cannot take place without the school board's approval.
So I'm up next with the superintendent's decision. The superintendent, of course, decides to implement the SBB system that would allocate money to the schools based on enrollment and student-specific needs. However, when analyzing the system, the superintendent must make sure that he's following the law with federal and state funds. He would also need to make sure that the money is spent equitably among schools, or he would be breaking the law according to the Leandro case. We also decided to take a look at the ethics and morals by using the 4 paradigms. As far as justice is concerned, is it fair and equitable? What formula would they use to decide what groups need more funding? And what would they decide, what would they determine as fairness in this scenario? As far as care is concerned, the superintendent obviously cares about the well-being of the students and their success, as he is seeking to make sure that funds are used for students with high needs.
Okay, we also talked about profession, so accounts for all students and their success while maintaining the idea of their best interests. The superintendent wants to allocate funds to ensure success for all students, giving extended assistance to those needing further support. And critique, the focus seems to be on one group, at-risk students. There's no mention of enrichment for those students who are on target or for AIG students. And then some of our final takeaway and thoughts. The SBB system is great, as a great idea in theory. However, there were a few concerns. So is he following the law with allocating the money to the school? No, not in the state of North Carolina. So we said that while the SBB is great in theory, we all want to do what we can to help each student to be successful. However, we must make sure that in the process of doing that, we are also following the law. How do you measure what each student needs to know if it's equitable? So if each school is doing something different using the money where they see fit, we had a hard time seeing how they will compare, how you compare the schools that are using that system. What would be the formula the SBB system would use to decide what school and students receives the money? Does the principal have the sole decision-making power? This could cause a lot of issues within the school and with stakeholders as well. Not everyone will agree that the money should be spent in certain areas where they want it to be spent. And number 4, or the 4th bullet point, how would the superintendent measure success with the implementation of the SBB system if the system was to be utilized within the school? So we said at the end of the year, how would you measure the success or failure of where the money was applied if you do not have something exact to compare it to? So that at the end, we decided that this was not a lawful idea and that there are numerous factors that would need to be considered.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Oh, by the way, Emily, how's baby Pierce?
He's doing good. He's sleeping right now.
Good for him. I wish
Oh,
I
yeah.
was. Me and babies have a lot in common. So here is the notion, and here are some things that folks kind of struggle with on this case. You got this one right, yay. Who won the Leandro case when the initial decision? Did the plaintiffs win, or did the defendant, who was the state, did they win?
To me, it doesn't sound like anybody's really winning this thing.
Well, unfortunately, there was a clear winner in this one. It was a knockout for the state.
Yeah, okay.
The Leandro plaintiffs did not prevail because
Right.
what they wanted was a fundamental change in how funding is done in North Carolina. Right now, we have a flat grant funding formula, which means if we're all enrolled in school, doesn't matter what district we're in, the state gives $8,000. They don't give the $8,000 up front, by the way. They divide it into 10, as we've talked about, and they only send it, you can only voucher it after you've spent your money the first time. They only give you back if they approve how you spent it. But every child minus absenteeism brings in the same money, whether you're in Mecklenburg or whether you're in Hoke, which one of the defendants. What the lawsuit sought to do was change that to a district power equalizer, where if you were in Hoke County, they sent you $12,000 for every student, and if you were in Mecklenburg, they sent you much less than that, and then that you were able to then tax yourself and get it at the end. See, what the Leandro plaintiff said is we start even. but we don't end even. And the state and the lawsuit said, and the decision was, there's no constitutional right to even. As long as we start you here at this level for a basic education, that's all you're guaranteed. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say you're guaranteed even that. It's in the preamble to the Constitution that states may provide for public education. And that's it, a basic education. No extra classes, no extracurriculars, no college prep, no AP, all that stuff's extra. All we're going to pay for is the basic stuff. You're entitled to that like they were giving you something. Well, you were always entitled to that since 1984 when the basic ed plan was passed. You were guaranteed a basic education, but no more. And people say, well, how do we know the state's funding it? Well, see, that's the not so funny part of this is whatever they send you, they say that's what a basic education costs. Which, wait, what? Whatever you sent me, that's what it costs. Well, yeah, that's what we're sending you. We have determined through our expertise in the General Assembly, and our expertise is based on having any particular group of idiots vote for us. That makes us an expert. We've decided that's what it costs. And if it's a little or if it's a lot, what we give you, that pays for a basic education. It really doesn't. To Wood's point, nobody really won on this, but the defendants lost. And so it didn't change the funding formula. We still have, now I've told you, I'm here back in Mecklenburg this evening, the very northern part of Mecklenburg at the lake here. The evaluation on my house that I'm sitting in right now, I'm not saying it went to 160, it went up 160 this one last year. My property evaluation went up $160,000 because here in Mecklenburg, we pay for education. There's a reason why we can almost match what the state pays. It's because we're willing to be taxed and we're willing to do what it takes. There's a lot of business here, but even private homes. We're not trying to throw the commissioners out in Cornelius or any of that, or the Mecklenburg County tax assessor. We're not trying to throw them out. We understand that that if you want quality schools, you have to pay for them. Now everybody's not that way, but there's no tax revolt in Mecklenburg County. That's part of the deal about living here. You want good schools, you got to pay for them. But the deal is we pay, we spend way more than the state average, way more on that. And so as a result of the defendants having lived, but the state said, we will give you some relief. We'll start a lottery. Problem with the lottery is none of the money, as I've told you, none of the money ever gets to the school system. If it does, it only comes from capital. And what's the problem with capital, by the way? Gardner-Webb, unfortunately, is learning this lesson about capital. A few years back, they built a big new shiny student center, and that's where hopefully when y'all finish when do y'all finish? This is summer, fall, spring. When we do the College of Ed ceremony, y'all will join us all. We'll go over to the Tucker Center. If there's room for us, we normally take up the whole thing, and we do our ceremony over there after the college's ceremony. We'll probably be over there. If not, we'll be out on the field if there's too many. But you'll get to see if you haven't been to Gardner-Webb, you'll get to see the new Tucker Center that was built a few years back. It's a marvelous facility. It's wonderful. I mean, it's 3 stories and it's open in the middle and it's glass and it's got everything in the world in it. It's a hoot, except it costs $2 million a year to keep the doors open. That's $2 million. Now, let's learn a lesson from this. When the state gives you lottery money, if you were to get lottery money, which is pork barrel, that means it doesn't come often or regular. There's no formula. It just means that whoever you got in the legislature, your representative from your area was voted for somebody and was owed a favor, so they gave them a little pork barrel money. But if they came to Gaston County and built a building on one of your campuses, what's the problem with that in terms of you're already strapped financially? What happens? Do they leave the money with you every year to run that building or to keep it up or to pay for it? No. And so
Becomes a liability.
it becomes a liability. That's exactly right. It becomes a big old huge white elephant sitting over next to your ball field like Tucker Center is. When they were calculating how much money they could make in payments on the thing, they weren't factoring in that the actual upkeep was as much as the payments every year. And when push came to shove, they couldn't afford the payments. They just had to let them ride, and they had to end up letting the bond and refinancing that whole deal, which has not been good. But you know, $2 million a year to keep the doors open. And so really the bond didn't really help very much because it's only capped on it. And it gave you more liabilities than assets. And so that didn't work. And so after the lottery turned out to be the fraud that it was in North and South Carolina, they did the same thing. So then they moved on and said, you know, we got to give you some extra money. But then the General Assembly says, wait a minute, aren't you getting Title I money? Or aren't you getting money for these programs? Aren't you getting this, that? Aren't you getting all these other things? And so it just kept bouncing along. And so here at the end, the West Ed report. And so Judge Lee, right before he retired, they got a new judge. I was on the meeting on that Zoom not long ago. They've got a new judge. You know, the best way to win court cases is have your bunch point the judge. So I don't think the General Assembly is worried too much about losing this deal. But Judge Lee said the General Assembly had to pony up $2 billion to make up for all these issues out in low wealth districts. But the General Assembly is fighting that. They're not. They say the judge can't do that. That they have taxing authority. So I don't know how much money we'll get out of the West Ed report, or the low wealth districts will get out of that or not. I don't have it. I watched that meeting, and that bunch of obsequious people that are standing there lying in your face, and you know they're lying. They know you're lying. They know you know they're lying, but they smile. But I don't think you're going to get any money out of that much. And so the disparities continue. So let's track the legality of what the superintendent's plan. All right. Can you move federal money? No. Can you spend it other than how it was sent? No. If you do, you will go home. You will not pass go. You will not collect your paycheck or $200. You will go directly to jail, just like in Monopoly. You cannot do that. That money comes to that school for that kid. That's why we call them head counts in federal programs. You can't be moving those around. All right, can you move state money? Leandro said no, absolutely not. And it said that you can't do it either. Not, you know, that not only do they hold that the state can't do that, the state has no obligation to equal funding in the end. Remember, it starts out equal, but it ends up unequal. And the Leandro case was about, wait a minute, we want you to give poorer districts more and richer districts less. So when they add their local tax base in, we end up equal at the end. And the state said no. We have no obligation to do that, and we forbid you as local districts to do that either. So can we move state money? No. Could we move local money? No. What about can the school board do something like that? Can they differentiate between schools? No. Why can't they do that? Line item budget. Does the school board in Gaston County fund the school's budget?
No.
No. Who does? County commission.
County commission.
Right. And so can't move federal money, can't move state money, can't move local money. What does that leave you? That would be none. Can't do it. While this is the notion here is, while well-intentioned, just because it's a good idea doesn't mean it's a legal idea. Now, let's play the devil's advocate. Let's say we over at the country club, and the kids that our school go to over here on the Kramer Mountain side of town over at the country club. We're going to take money from their kids and give on the poor side of town over there in Ramlo. We're going to give them kids some money. How do you think that's going to go over with the parents over there at the country club?
Be mad.
They'll be madder than damn it. It will not go well. And so they would never agree that it's the right thing to do. What about my child? Well, your child has naturally built-in advantages. Yeah, but we want more advantages. Yeah. I mean, we're you know, this notion of equity, not everybody has that notion of equity. Some people who have the advantage want the advantage and are glad they have the advantage and would argue that they'd worked hard for their kids to have those advantages. And so you're not going to get, even if you were to figure out a way how to do this, you're not going to get public support for this. They'll burn your house down. This bunch would, they would burn your house down, and they have the wherewithal to do that. So there's several things to learn here. Hopefully you dug a little bit into school-based budgeting. Hopefully you dug into, you know, criterion-based or outcomes-based, those objectives-based, different kinds of budgeting. Hopefully you got into that. And so my question for you is, let me pull a note right here that I wrote myself. I wanted to ask this question tonight. Based on what you read, what kind of budgeting is done at the school level? Anybody want to venture a guess?
Do you mean in general or this instance?
When we talk about the types of budgeting like school-based or flat grant, what kind of budgeting do we do at the school level?
Is that discretionary or not discretionary? What is it?
Priority-based budgeting. Write that down. Priority-based budgeting.
You know, I had that wrote down. I should have just said it.
You should just said that. Priority-based budgeting. All right. Now you say, Dale, you know, you're jumping around on this here. How does this go from? How does this go from Leandro and where you can move state money and those things? How does this jump over to this? All right. So we've established that state is flat grant funding. That means everybody gets the same. You can't move it around. We know that federal money comes earmarked for individual kids. Local money is budgeted to the school district in line items. And so we're down at the bottom of the line now. Remember, it goes federal, state, local, and then school. So we've established how the money works at each of the first three levels. All right, let's talk about how the money works at the fourth level, which is the school level. Priority-based budgeting. Now, we're going to circle back to OMA Task 1. At the end of OMA Task 1, after you've shown all this data from your school before we get into it, the last thing you had to answer was what is the process for budgeting in your building and how much is your school improvement team involved? Remember that at the end of OMA Task 1? Everybody go, yeah, we remember that. Yeah, that was only a couple of weeks ago. All right. Why that's important is in priority-based budget, your budget is based on priorities at your school. How do we know that that's how you budgeted your school? What is the state law requirement that you do? Is that you form a school improvement team, right? Now, who's on that school improvement team? That's in the law. 288 says you have to form one. Who's on that team? Are teachers on that team? Yes. What about parents?
Yes.
Yes. Community members? Yes. What about students in secondary schools? Yes. You're supposed to put together this group of people on your school improvement team for the purpose of equity and diversity and transparency. Those three: equity, diversity, and transparency. You're supposed to put together a school improvement team, and they are supposed to look at the priorities of your school based on what did you do? Remember when you did the app sale? You sat and you disaggregated all your test scores and found your most pressing need. Well, that's what you have to do when you do the academic session of your school improvement plan. But remember that in priority-based budget, you're only supposed to fund the priorities in your school as agreed to by that community-based group, equity, transparency, diversity. That group is supposed to have a say-so in how you budget your school. And it's got to be based on priorities. What's our most pressing need? Why do you think we label that most pressing need in the app cell? But it's got to be your priority. Whatever that is that's what you've got to fund. That's the way local budgeting is done. So we've got flat grant, we've got money that follows the pupil, we've got line item budgeting from the county commissioners, what we're going to spend. At the school level, we do priority-based budgeting. It has to be linked back to our school improvement team. And we know that, you know, when we say, how do we address equity, diversity, and transparency? Because we involve our school improvement team. And what decisions do they make about what is funded? It's based on priorities, academic first. And we know that our fundraising should feed into that, the money that we develop locally. So here's a notion. Should we use our capital money that comes to us? Should we use it for something like air conditioners? Probably not. What about money raised by the PTA?
Maybe so.
Probably not. Should be something academic, shouldn't it? Should be something academic, but that's what we're talking about. When we say priority based, it's priorities, not physical plant priorities. It's academic priorities. We have folks who make that mistake too many times, principals who make that mistake. Well, we really needed that, you know, that new chalk machine to line our ball field. Well, did it go through your school improvement team? Or did the booster club buy? And well, you know, we use this money. We have a booster club that we could get something like that from. But we got to make sure that the money that comes into our local budget, not the booster club budget, our local budget at the school is designed to address academic priorities, priority-based budget. Now, if you get outside of those parameters, you put yourself at risk. What I'm telling you, that's kind of where I'm headed with this. If you get outside the parameters on any of these funds, whether it be federal, state, local, or school funds, if you get outside the accepted or defined parameters, remember those codes when you talk to your school bookkeeper about all those different codes, how to spend money. If you get outside of the parameters, and remember, there's a different system for each of these budgets. There is a different system. It's not the same for federal and state, not the same for state and local, not the same for local and school. There is a different budgeting system for all four of these. And if you get outside the parameters, you put yourself at risk in a big way. So hopefully this case helps us define, you know, this case was to help us to define, how does the state money work? Why is there disparities? And should we try to address those disparities? But it leads us into that conversation. Now, I'm going to go ahead. I put a new document in. At the end of the case, I'm going to share my screen. And I'll show you where it is, and then I'll show you so I put a new document in. All right.
I've already read it. Ha ha ha.
You've already read it. You were ahead of me. That ain't hard to be. I'm old and slow. All right. So at the end of case study 2, it says CHC Borough Superintendent. And if you click on that, it will bring up this article that I pulled up. I told you about this right before the pandemic, or as the pandemic was starting. The superintendent got fired in Chapel Hill, Carrboro. And if you read through this, you'll see, well, geez, this is the Leandro case. How'd she not know this? And I'll summarize it for you right quick. The superintendent understood or knew the Leandro case, and that she couldn't give Carborough side, which is poor, the poor and minority, and the Chapel Hill side of her district, they're complete. It's a tale of two cities. They're white and affluent in Chapel Hill and not in Carborough. And so she wanted to get more resources to them. Well, that, you can't be hiring teachers because that's state money and that's a continuing budget. So what she said is, I want to do exactly what this superintendent did. I want to do that. And so she hired a private consulting firm that would bring teachers in, and she would just pay them a lump sum. And she said, well, I have discretionary money up to $90,000 without board approval. And so, but she entered into a contract of $1 million and was going to do payments of just a little less than 90, not understanding that you can only do that discretionary up to 90,000 one time. But she entered into $1 million contract, and it's, as soon as this money started going to the Carborough side of the district, a retired principal from the Chapel Hill side who had a granddaughter on the Chapel Hill side said, wait a minute, this is a violation of Leandro. You can't do this. You can't, the state says you're not allowed to do this. And of course, immediately they fired the chief financial officer, and the superintendent was out within, they let her go on medical leave, but she was out within 2 weeks. But yes, we had a sitting superintendent in North Carolina that tried to circumvent Leandro. It did not go well for her, nor the finance officer, and several other people in her cabinet got dismissed shortly thereafter. That happened, folks, in 2020. We're not talking about 100 years ago. So, you try this at your own peril. You make these mistakes at your own peril. I can't caution you enough about how careful and how knowledgeable you have to be about the money. And even superintendents, get a little big for their britches. I'm gonna do it anyway. Yeah. How'd that work out for you? It's a hot topic of discussion in the unemployment line. All right. Excellent job. I really liked your timeline, by the way. That was really good. That was really good. Thank you for that. That was really nice. All right. So let me refer to my notes here. 60304. So next group that we will have will be Daphne and Angie and Charlene. Are we sharing our screen?
Daphne is.
Yes, I am.
I think she's working it out.
It is, well, according to my side, it is sharing.
No.
Okay, let's try it again.
There you go.
All right.
All right. Good evening, everyone. You've already gotten a synopsis of the case, Leandro versus the state, and that letter to the community written by the superintendent. Daphne, myself, and Angie will be presenting on that. So we wanted to outline what the case is all about. So the first point is that the argument from the plaintiff is that the quality of the child's education ought not to be dependent upon the wealth of the family and community in which that child was born. And we can all agree to that, that each of us would want our child to be exposed to the best education, and that should not be dependent on where it is that we live or a zip code. It costs more to properly educate disadvantaged children. So that's what those plaintiffs are also arguing, why it is that they're requiring more funding. And the state had not done enough to equalize school funding across North Carolina. Now, the plaintiffs' proposed solution was a higher level of stable funding for these low wealth communities. The case started in 1994, which Wanda's group aptly pointed out and showed us a timeline of that. I must commend them on that. It's a decade-long case in North Carolina where all children residing in North Carolina have a fundamental state constitutional right to the opportunity to receive a sound basic education. Now, the court defined a sound education as one that provides all children and youth with opportunities to sufficiently read, write, and speak the English language, also to make informed choices with sufficient knowledge of geographic history, economics, and political systems. So these should be areas of importance in spending state or federal funds. Successfully engaging in post-secondary education and vocational training. So once you're providing them with sound basic education, then you should be preparing them to go on to further studies and also to become gainfully employed and compete on an equal basis with other persons in society and globally. Angie's going to pick up with the appropriateness of the superintendent's plan.
Actually, that's going to be me. And we looked at arguments in support of the plan and arguments against the plan. When it came to considering arguments in support of the plan, it is true that it is more costly to educate economically disadvantaged students. Therefore, redistributing resources from wealthy districts to low wealth districts would help to provide equity. In theory, present funding systems does not allow all students to compete on an equal basis with others in pursuing further education. And also an argument in support would include the fact that all children residing in North Carolina have a fundamental state constitutional right to the opportunity to receive a sound basic education. And even in the most recent of the Leandro case, it was determined that the state is still not meeting that definition of sound basic education. And at that point, the lower income students were included in the case as well as the original plaintiffs. Arguments against the plan, parents of students with wealthy districts would not agree with reallocation of resources as their children are being denied of what is rightfully theirs. So here again, as was pointed out earlier, this would infuriate parents of children, parents of children who live in those wealthy districts. As well, another argument against the plan would be court states that neither school districts nor counties have any constitutional right to equal funding. Another point that we've heard repeated again and again on tonight. And finally, another argument against the plan would be the fact that the Supreme Court ruled that the state of North Carolina, not the local school district, has the ultimate constitutional obligation to actively safeguard and successfully deliver every child's Leandro right. No exceptions, no excuses, even though the superintendent had good intentions.
Okay, so looking at it through the different lenses of the ethical paradigms, the justice lens basically says, is there the law, rule, or policy related to this issue being followed? So this perspective really supports upholding the rule of law regardless of personal feelings about the situation. And the superintendent would not be upholding the law if he decides to go ahead with the student-based budgeting plan. student-based budgeting is not supported by any rule, law, policies, or procedures in North Carolina because the state, not the LEA, makes determinations about how to disperse state funds. Then the ethic of critique ones, basically asks, is there a power imbalance? So who's getting an advantage or who might be disadvantaged by the decisions that are made? So the superintendent views the funds as a barrier to equity within his district. And so he does seek change, and he's observed it as an imbalance that he wants to correct through policy. But the problem is that his policy is not legal, and he could be creating an imbalance by empowering the wrong people, because he's putting power into people's hands that were not meant to have the power to make the decisions about the funds. So that could create another issue that maybe he did not consider. And then profession. So the superintendent has included plans to be transparent by reaching out to parents and other stakeholders so that they play a part in the decision-making process, and he's promoting equity. But again, his decision does not actually adhere to any North Carolina school financing laws, despite his good intentions. And the ethic of care, the superintendent's plan does state that it's in the best interest of all children, and that does show that he's using an ethic of care when he's attempting to resolve funding inequities. His plan, like Daphne said, may upset some parents, and that he tries to enact procedural justice to be equitable to all children. But again, the law must be upheld unless or until it is modified. So the takeaways that we have here are that the superintendent cannot enact a financial plan that is against state school finance law, in this case, Leandro. The superintendent does not have the power to use funding without board approval, and the superintendent cannot move allotted funds in the local budget approved by the county commissioners for one thing and then spend it on another. So his plan, while well-intentioned, would not use state or local funds lawfully, and all funds have a specified usage when they are allotted. So you can't just pick and choose, like, I want to do it this way and do it that way instead. That's to you, Charlene. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, I love your last slide there is, I mean, that's what, you superintendent can't do anything without their own board. I mean, and much less the county commissioners. And then I like your first slide that talked about the low wealth districts wanted stable funding. What does stable funding mean? That means you get it every year, right?
Reoccurring. Yeah, reoccurring funds.
Reoccurring. What's the problem with lottery money? Pork barrel.
We don't know how much.
One, it never makes it to school.
It never makes it, and if it does, it just comes one time. What and again, back to, if we build a building with it, do we get money next year to pay for the building? No. We can't really get any traction. It's just pork barrel. And then people do stupid things with it, like that fellow up in Surrey built a cafeteria so all 300 students could eat lunch at one time. I was like, you not know how to run 2 lunch shifts? I mean, that was just dumb. That was just wasted. But stable funding means you allot me this year on the number of my students. Next year, I get the same allotment, or if it goes up. And see, that's what I mean. What Leandro was trying to break was that flat grant funding formula. They were trying to get it where we get more and they get less. But that didn't happen. But pork barrel money don't help you a whole lot. A lot of times it just gives you more liability than it does assets. Pork barrel is not really good in the school business. Pork barrel meaning single appropriations. This one-time money, and then it goes away. But the problem with lottery money is it doesn't go away. Just as and if you don't want to respond, just by show, how many of you play the lottery? I mean, there's nothing wrong with playing the lottery, but what I'm talking about is part of the problem with lottery is that it's not really that widespread in terms of, I don't think as many people play it as they pretended were going to play it when they were trying to get this passed. I mean, during that time, they acted like, everybody would play the lottery. I think it's probably only 30, 40% of the population plays the lottery. And I don't think that, I mean, the amount of money didn't ever turn out to be anything near like what they talked about. You know, it was the same kind of thing when ABC money came along. Bill Mayberry said it will be manna from heaven. Wasn't much money coming from the liquor store either. Not much money comes from the lottery.
Can we do a show of hands on that one, or no?
What goes to the liquor store? But my point is we've made excuses forever in North Carolina that, yeah, we know y'all need more money, so we're going to do this. Well, that was just because people wanted liquor by the drink in certain places. Dry counties wanted alcohol. Well, but that much money for schools. And then it was, well, we want, we need money for schools. Well, we'll give you a lottery, but it didn't turn out to be that much either. That's just people want, the lottery company wanted to make millions of dollars. Politicians wanted the campaign donations from the lottery company. And so, but that kind of thing never really works out. It's unfortunate, but that's just the truth. It never, all that money, that manna from heaven never really ever shows up. Excellent presentation. 2 slides specifically were great. I really like that. All right, Woods, Savannah, and Laura. Before you share, let me stop just a second. Did we get Wanda back in again? Let me go to my participants and see if they'll let me. Wanda said she got something about she got knocked out of viewing. I don't know what it is. Asked to unmute, spotlight, make host, rename, allowed to record, put in waiting room, report. I don't know. I think so. Wanda could have to unmute herself. It might be I don't know what happened to hers. I didn't have control of the board when she went off the board. So hopefully she can still see or hear us. All right, moving along here. Wood, is Savannah with us tonight? Where's your partner, Wood?
She is not here tonight. I think she mentioned it last week.
Yeah.
Laura and I have it down, so we'll be all right.
Good. Go.
Yep. All right, let's get started here. Let's see. I think Laura's got the screen, control of the screen.
Yep.
We're going to start into it. This is Laura, Savannah, and myself. This is the summer of 22. Y'all were curious. This thing's just flying by. All right, so first part is Leandro. We're going to go into the case just a little bit. I really like that timeline we saw earlier. So we are going to just spend a little bit of time in the timeline. Leandro 1, I believe it is referred to. 1994 it starts. You have parents, students, and schools, as y'all have heard, in 5 low-wealth counties: Hoke, Halifax, Robeson, or you say Robinson, I guess, Vance, and Cumberland. They're going to sue the state of North Carolina. The plaintiffs are claiming that despite the higher tax rates, they had lower revenues. This meant that the school districts did not have enough money to provide equal education to their students. This in turn meant, that teacher pay, educational materials, and special services were specifically suffering in areas of inequity when compared to other wealthier districts. I read that urban school districts added that they were overburdened with high numbers of disadvantaged students, and that the state constitution requires North Carolina to provide adequate resources to educate disadvantaged students anywhere in the state. So here's some of the rulings from that 1997. Of course, y'all have heard the opportunity to receive a sound basic, all children in North Carolina. The definition of sound basic education is essentially the sufficient ability to read, write, and speak the English language.
Mm-hmm.
You have some mathematics, near physical science, the sufficient fundamental knowledge of geography, history, those things. I won't read all that off, but they did actually go in and try to attempt to define those things. That was in 97. They also said that neither school districts nor the counties of North Carolina have the right to equal funding, so they do not have the constitutional right to this equal funding, and that the state has the ultimate constitutional obligation to safeguard and successfully deliver every child's Leandro right, which I thought was an interesting way to phrase that. It almost, the state, as we just talked about, kind of ends up winning this thing, and they called it Leandro's right, which I just thought was an interesting phrasing of the.
Yeah, yeah. What they were claiming is that, we have to protect these other kids. If we take from one, we will harm them. And so, yeah, it was kind of in your face that they called it Leandro right. That was that was kind of an end zone celebration.
Yeah, that's awful.
Yeah.
But basically what that meant is that they control the money. Leandro 2 was between, I believe 04 was the final decision on that one. The Superior Court Judge Howard Manning, I believe that was the judge there, said that the state of North Carolina had not met by that point its constitutional obligations to all children, and it was directed to decide on the remedies or solutions to ensure each student's Leandro right was met. Judge Manning determined that every child is entitled to a competent teacher. Every school must have a competent principal, and every school district must have the resources necessary to support students, teachers, and the principals. Again, in 2004, the North Carolina Supreme Court upheld that all children have the right to equal opportunity, again, going back to that earlier ruling, but this is including students not currently enrolled in public schools in North Carolina. So this is all students, which I found was interesting. We're going to skip forward to 2017. There's a lot that goes on between there. I think there are potentially like some lawsuits that happen, but basically, the state is failing to meet the educational needs. And so in 2017, the West Ed Independent Consulting Group is hired to make this report or investigation. They make this report. And I think it comes out I can't remember if they were hired in 2017 or it came out in 2019, something like that. But they did identify 8 critical areas that needed to be fixed. But they did find that the state of North Carolina had failed to meet the educational needs of the students and had failed for the future success of the individuals, their communities, and the state. And then this is still an ongoing process. I read way too many articles and spent way too much time on it because I just kind of found it interesting. November 2021, the North Carolina Court of Appeals, I think that's what you referred to earlier, Dr. Lamb, they stopped the transfer. I think it was David Lee who said $1.7 billion would fund this comprehensive plan. He was going to appropriate these funds, but then the General Assembly said that he had no power to do so.
Yeah, and they threw him out and got a judge that was on their side.
Yeah, which is Michael Robinson. You can tell that he was on their side because he reduced that amount of money to $785 million instead of $1.7 billion in March 2022. And then in August, the North Carolina Supreme Court is going to hear oral arguments on Judge Michael Robinson's plan on how to appropriate those funds or how to get those funds to the schools. Yeah, they still don't know where the money's coming from, evidently, because it's not coming from savings, and they just don't know where it's coming from, is what it sounded like.
Well,
yeah,
I'm not sure it's coming from anywhere. I mean, they'll keep this in court until you're as old as I am.
Yep.
That's why I said I was on the one in November and I was on the one in March on the Zooms. The actual money was closer to $2 billion was the original, and like you say, it was reduced to 785. But still no plan to do that, and then they're still fighting that. I don't know if any money will ever go.
Yeah.
But now I suspect there will be some money going, but it will be money that was going to go anyway.
Right.
See, that's part of what they want to claim is we're already giving this money, but that's in the normal budget. So what they're going to want to say is, you know, what we're already giving is, if this is covered by that, you know, maybe give them another 50 cents or $1. But, you know, I'm telling you, this bunch that General Assembly, I mean, they are, they're mad dogs. I mean, you're going to have to fight them tooth and nail to get any money out of them. I can tell you that.
I think we got better chances with the lottery on this one.
Well, yeah, that's about right. I mean, I don't, you know, you know, there's some of them that just get up and say, we ain't even gonna give them a penny. But they don't say it that nicely. I mean, it's ugly, it's rough, it's bare knuckles. Now, they might be wearing nice suits, but it's bare knuckles.
This is Laura's part, so I'm gonna turn it over to her.
Thank you, Wood. Part 2 of our slides is the student-based budgeting letter. So we've all read the letter, and in the letter, the superintendent planned to allocate state money based on the prioritization of need. This method is problematic or illegal because LEAs can't move state money according to Leandro 1997. So we went through the 4 ethical paradigms, justice, and in our group, we talked about that no matter how good his intentions were, his actions were still illegal. Money is being taken from schools where it was originally intended, whether it was deemed deserved or not. For care, concern is attempting to be addressed through the support of the superintendent and the collaboration of the principals, but is still against the law. The critique is, when we looked at it, we kind of looked at a social class. So the social class is key as the superintendent intends to redistribute the wealth based on socioeconomic, demographic, and other factors. We also thought it may be an abuse of power because he's spending money where he has no power or authority to do so. Finally, the profession, the principal and the superintendents did not consider or evaluate the legal consequences in this decision-making. The duty of the principal and the superintendent is to uphold the law no matter what. So points of focus that we talked about were, of course, the violation of Leandro, the superintendent and the LAA moving funds without the consent of the state, problems with equity, taking from some schools to give to poorer ones, what structures are in place to ensure that those students continue to receive a sound basic education. We also talked about the teacher positions. When you're moving the funding, does this mean that you're moving teachers and personnel? And how does this align with the West End report moving forward? And then finally, we discussed if the Board of Education was negligent or corrupt, or possibly both. And we had talked about who are the we in the letter. Is it both the principals and or the school board members? Next, we're going to look at the standards of arbitrary and capricious. By definition, it's a willful and unreasonable action without consideration or in disregard of facts or law. The superintendent's actions may be arbitrary based on the allocation of the funds and the prioritization of students as identified by the superintendent. The state should decide where the money goes. The superintendent's actions are not capricious. The superintendent is trying to do the right thing, but he is doing it through illegal methods. And then we discussed a suggested course of action. The first thing was to utilize appropriate priority-based budgeting and site-based budgeting strategies that do not require illegal use of state funds. We addressed the fact that the superintendent did want to bring about a cultural change in the budgeting process. He just has to go about it the right way. Number 2, review and audit existing long-term and short-term fiscal plans already in place at the district level. 3, report the superintendent to the school board. And 4, report the superintendent and the school board to law enforcement authorities. And these are the sources that were used.
Excellent. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Is the budget that the superintendent sends to the county commissioners every year. Is it really a priority-based budget?
I would say no, because it includes a lot of things that don't necessarily apply specifically to academics. Like the overall budget that they send includes a lot of things.
Yeah, it's not really
Right.
priority-based.
Right, right.
It's a line item budget. And it's this much goes to this and this much goes to that. Now, it's supposed to be based on a zero sum, that you start with zero and what do you need, but we know we don't do it that way. Because we don't ever want to take less than we had last year. So we don't really do it that way. Unfortunately, it's supposed to be, but it's not. But legally it's supposed to be at the school level too. And that's what I was talking about before. But one of the things I want to make sure you understand is you're supposed to, and there's a good point in that one. The local school budget is supposed to be a priority-based budget, but it is not. In actuality, it is not. It's just a simple line item budget that says we want this much for this, and this. And so, but in theory that it is. But again, this is all about no money, no budgeting strategies, different budgeting philosophies. Know these things. All right, very good. All right, so last but certainly not least is Marsha, Paris, Alex, and Heather.
I'm sorry about that. Okay, let's see. All right, so we started off with talking about what does the North Carolina Constitution say in regards to education. There's no federal constitutional right to an education. It is a matter reserved for the states. So it's the North Carolina Constitution states the people have a right to the privilege of education, and it is a duty of the state to guard and maintain that right. It is a duty of the state and local government to provide a uniform system of free public schools wherein equal opportunities shall be provided for all students. State law says education is a right in North Carolina, and general and uniform system of free public schools shall be provided throughout the state. North Carolina Supreme Court says in 1997, Leandro versus State, they determined that children were entitled to a sound basic education, the ability to read, write, speak English, and have fundamental knowledge of math and physical science, fundamental knowledge of geography, history, basic economics and political systems, and academic and vocational skills to help students be successful in post-secondary education, vocational training, and or gainful employment.
We also included a timeline summary of the outcomes for the Leandro case. This is a decades-long case in North Carolina. Started in 1994 with the 5 low-wealth counties. They sued the state, claiming that children in these counties were not receiving the same level of educational opportunities and students in higher income counties. These local school boards were joined by individual plaintiffs. The first was Kathleen Leandro and her son, Robert Leandro, who was a student in the Hope County schools. These 5 school systems and families argued that it cost more to properly educate disadvantaged children and that the state had not done enough to equalize school funding. Their proposed solution was a higher level of stable funding for low wealth counties. Several urban counties were allowed to intervene in the lawsuit. They argued that the state constitution requires North Carolina to provide schools everywhere with adequate resources to fully educate disadvantaged students. In 1997, the North Carolina Supreme Court unanimously agreed that neither school districts nor counties have any constitutional right to equal funding, but ruled that the North Carolina Constitution guarantees a sound basic education for all of the state's school children. In addition, the Supreme Court ruled that the state of North Carolina, not local school districts, has the ultimate constitutional obligation to actively safeguard and successfully deliver every child's Leando right. The court did not determine whether the state was meeting that obligation and referred the matter to a lower court. In 2002, the Superior Court finds that the state is not meeting its obligation in providing the sound basic education, and Superior Court Judge Howard Manning argued the state was not providing the adequate oversight of the schools that had low test scores, but did not rule on whether funding was insufficient. He ruled that the state must have highly qualified teachers in every classroom, have competent, well-trained principals in every school, provide adequate resources, and provide pre-K for all children at risk of not being prepared to succeed academically. In 2004, the North Carolina Supreme Court ruled on a second ruling. They affirmed most of Judge Manning's rulings, but determined that the court could not require pre-K because the law does not require school for children younger than 7 years old. By 2018, Judge Manning had retired and we have a new judge, Judge Lee. He orders an independent consultant firm, West Ed, to recommend ways for North Carolina to comply with the mandates of the Leando rulings. In 2019, West Ed released its report that was more than 300 pages long. In 2020, Judge Lee signed a consent order saying that all parties agreed to the facts and need to take action and agreed to develop a plan of action within 60 days. However, due to COVID-19, that action plan did not get put into place until March of 2021. It was a 57-page report to implement many of the recommendations of the West Ed report, and that total cost would be $5.6 billion. In June of 2021, the Superior Court approves the plan and orders a periodic status update on the progress made towards implementing it. In November of 2021, Judge Lee orders that the state to fund the plan through a transfer of state funds. A Court of Appeals panel stopped that order and it is now being appealed in the North Carolina Supreme Court.
Okay, now for the letter to the community from the superintendent. So a little background. At first, the letter, proposed a student-based budget. The superintendent's tone in the letter seemed encouraging to the parents, but a little deceiving because parents probably do not know the legal side of all of this. But he was communicating with his stakeholders, but theoretically, this would allocate more resources to students in need and the money would follow the student. So this was a good idea, but as Dr. Lamb said before, good ideas can sometimes get you into trouble. So is his plan appropriate? No, because no matter how good his intentions were, it's against the law, bottom line. You cannot manipulate state funds. Local counties cannot allocate state or federal funds. The superintendent does not have the authority to create formulas that determine worth of individual students. And the funding formula is the job of the state according to the Leando law. And it kind of made me think of Robin Hood, ethical versus lawful, the Robin Hood effect. You're, taking from the rich and giving to the poor, which sounds, like a great thing to do, but it's against the law. And it's, you know, however his good intentions were, you know, again, it all goes back to the law. So the state must ensure that they are providing, as we mentioned before, the resources to protect and provide each student's Leandro right. So, you know, no matter how good his intentions were, bottom line is he's breaking the law and he can't do that.
All right. I had the legal and ethical paradigms for justice. The superintendent is concerned with equity, wants to allocate funds for students to receive resources in proportion to their needs, which we all have agreed tonight the law does not support. CARE, the student-based budgeting plan had a specific method to allocate the funds in which principals' concerns were shared. He involved them in the process of its development. And it seems that his plan, he wants to build school and community relationships. Critique, obviously there may be a lot of pushback on the student-based budgeting with certain student needs, such as the number of at-risk learners. This may give the impression that the plan favors certain schools, and obviously I think it was discussed in an earlier presentation, those schools who would be receiving less funding would lose valuable resources, such as teachers, which is not a good thing. And then profession, student-based budgeting shows that the superintendent values equity, transparency, and social justice. However, he clearly does not understand the legality of implementation of such a program.
Okay, excellent job. All four groups tonight. Yay. All right, I'm gonna take you, I'm gonna beat you up and take you too much time. I'm gonna give you a little time off tonight, but before we go, what would you think of the superintendent's letter and his plan if it were legal? If it were legal, what do you think of the superintendent's plan? Did he do it the right way? I thought we had a good one in the last presentation there. That weighted formula. How easy would that be to come up with, and how controversial would that be if we started assigning weights or worth or value to certain students? Would that be a really good idea?
Would be hard because, like, in our district, at least, we have a lot of transient kids and like life situations change. And so, like, how can you really put a weight on that? And then who are you going to offend when you go and say, like, you need this or you need that? Because there's a lot of people that don't even fill out the free and reduced lunch form. You know, they don't want to put their income on there sometimes. Right. And, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
We are a lot of poverty.
I mean, you know, when you start doing weighting,
it's a good idea in theory, but it's very hard to enact.
Yeah, it's going to be kind of hard, and it's kind of discriminatory too. I mean, do two LD kids count the same as one EMR kid? That's pretty ugly, isn't it? That kind of thought, something like that. I mean, you know, we get into that. So I don't know that would be good. Was there any transparency or input, you know, from the community? Now, they said the 4 principals that they did the pilot program, they gave a little extra money last year. They liked it. Well, of course they liked it because they got extra money. But what about the folks who didn't get the extra money? I'd say they'd probably have a different opinion. And the third part of this that I really thought was kind of poor taste on the superintendent's part is, who's going to have to take the beating for this? If you had questions, could you give them to his office? Oh, that would be no. You had to go, go to your local principal's office and share your problems or concerns or arguments with him. That's never a good idea either. So the notion of this might have been good. The execution was poor and it was illegal. Hopefully you would be much more politically savvy than to do something that was this poorly designed or thought through or devised, and then dump the brunt of the backlash on the people that work for you underneath you. It's good lessons for all of us as school administrators. You know, we don't throw the people underneath you under the bus. There won't be many people underneath you. People won't work for you if you throw them under the bus in political situations like this. And, you know, the Robin Hood notion, I like that from Marcia, is, you know, the Robin Hood, yeah, the poor people liked it, but now the rich people had a different view of how that, of that Robin Hood, that Robin Hood deal. They had a different notion of that they didn't like it near as good. So
I think it would be a problem. I'm sorry, Dr. Lamb.
Go right ahead.
I was just thinking, I think it would be a problem even among the lower, I mean, the lower economic districts, in that we have so many parents that are transient that if it looks like one school that's close to the neighborhood is getting more money, you would have a lot of kids just moving. Like
Right.
Parents do that a lot in our district anyway. They wander a lot.
Well,
And
we
so it
had
would
that.
be really hard to fund that.
Well, we had that discussion in my class last night, is district boundaries. What are you going to do when kids show up over here because they got more over there than they got over there? What are you going to do? Turn them away? I mean, yeah, we had that discussion last night, because different school districts do different things different ways. But you're exactly right. You may have that may encourage more transiency among your kids. I mean, you know, having worked in inner city in Charlotte, I mean, we had a line out the guidance office every Monday morning with the new ones that showed up. You know, that's a problem. But part of it too is and I, you know, when you start making comparisons, like I mentioned about these two EC kids versus that one. I mean, we all know that it takes more and is harder and have to have assistance with self-contained kids. These EC kids, these LD kids, you know, did they count? How many of them counts as many as one of those self-contained kids? Boy, you start getting into some really ugly conversations there. Really ugly and inappropriate conversations there when you start trying to figure out, do this weighting deal. Ooh, it's not good. And so, even if it were a legal thing to do, it would have to be a whole lot more developed than what this guy did. I'm assuming it was, that folks understood that as well. As good ideas don't always translate into good, into an adequate process, or don't turn out well. And this is one of those cases. Read that case in there that I attached under case study 2 down at the bottom under the Duke law of what they held. Read that case from Carver. Again, she had a good idea, but again, she had the misfortune of having a recently retired principal on the Chapel Hill side that knew the law and said, wait a minute. My granddaughter is on this side, on the Chapel Hill side, and she's getting hosed here on this deal. And by the way, this is not legal. She knew Leandro. And so make sure you read that and understand what kind of stakes we're playing for here. So next week we'll have another content night next week, and then we'll have a week off for the 4th. And when you come back, your next case study, which is We Are Normal 2. There's not a lot to say about that. There's just research to do and do your reading. You know the right thing to do on that one, but we'll get to that. If you have any questions, I'll answer them next week. You should probably do a read through before we meet again next week, because again, there won't be we go right up against our break, and then when you come back, you got to present. You all are doing well. Your work is wonderful. I like your writing. Your OMAs have been great. Everybody seems to be on track and where they need to be. I don't think I have anything else. I think I'm going to we're trying to get out by 7:30 tonight. I think I'm going to make it. I'll open the floor up for any questions that anybody has on anything. If not, I'll see you next week. Everybody have a good time. Stay out of the heat. Thank you.